It was a Saturday night and my friends and I were getting ready to head out to a local bar's music showcase. We had bought tickets for the main band weeks ago and were excited to see their performance later in the evening. In our enthusiasm, chatting and goofing around, we lost track of time. Glancing at the clock, I realized we needed to get going immediately or we were going to miss the opening act, which was scheduled to start in 15 minutes. I quickly grabbed my wallet, keys off the kitchen counter, and hustled my friends out the door. We piled into my car and raced to the bar, luckily arriving just in the nick of time. The opening band was still setting up on stage, and we snagged seats at a table near the front. After enjoying several drinks and cheering through the high-energy show, I reached to pull out my phone to text another friend who might be able to join us. But patting all my pockets, I couldn't locate it anywhere. Confused, I checked again, even asking my friends if they had spotted my phone lying around. But no luck. Now slightly buzzed and puzzled, we retraced my steps, peering under all the tables and chairs in the area we had been hanging out. The staff helped us search the floor near the bar and darker corners. But my phone didn't turn up anywhere. I knew I must have had it when we left the house, since I used it to map directions earlier. Had it fallen out of my pocket outside, or in the parking lot somehow? Unable to solve the mystery, we finally gave up searching and decided to try calling my number from my friend's phone instead. After 2 rings, someone unexpectedly answered. "Hello," I said in surprise, but the person just breathed quietly without responding. "I think you have my phone. I lost it tonight," I started to explain. But after a few more seconds of creepy silence, they abruptly hung up. A chill went through me, but I tried to stay calm and rational. Perhaps someone had just found a lost phone at the bar and answered curiously without intending theft. But it was still deeply unsettling. I reported the incident to staff, who said they'd be on the lookout and call me if it got turned in. Annoyed, but figuring I'd have to deal with getting a replacement tomorrow, I put the bizarre call out of mind for the rest of the night. My friends and I stayed to enjoy the main band before I dropped them all off safely back home and headed to my place. Pulling into my driveway, the call from my stolen phone kept nagging at me. I replayed my memories of the evening in my head, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. I specifically remembered placing my phone on the bed right before leaving, since I had checked the map route on it one last time. A creepy sensation came over me. If it had never left the house, it answered when we had called it from the bar. I entered the dark, empty house cautiously and went straight to my bedroom, flipping on lights. Just as I suspected, there was my phone sitting right on top of the bedspread, seemingly never having been disturbed. I searched everywhere, checking for any signs of forced entry or intruder, but nothing else was out of place. My skin crawled thinking about someone unknown lurking in my home, answering calls on my phone before sneaking away again unseen. I double-checked the locks and peered out the windows uneasily before heading to bed. Exhausted yet wired with adrenaline, I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and rustle outside. I kept envisioning someone watching me from the shadows just beyond my sight. Sharing the bizarre story with my friends the next day, they agreed the entire incident was super creepy. We debated calling the police, but had no real evidence a crime had occurred. The phone was back undamaged, and nothing else in my house had been taken. Filing a report about such transient, ambiguous events seemed unlikely to lead anywhere. But I couldn't shake the chilling uncertainty about what had actually happened that night. In the years since, though I have upgraded phones many times, the bizarre experience has lingered in my memory. I'd always make sure to keep careful track of my phone now when I'm out and about. And I've installed security cameras and a top-of-the-line alarm system in that house for added peace of mind, just in case. We all have those inexplicable brushes with the unknown that prickle our senses about how fragile safety can be. Whatever mundane explanation might logically account for that unsettling call, some deeper instinct still shudders, recognizing darker possibilities lurking within the everyday if we dare to glimpse them. But the real horrors lie not in darkness itself, only in how we choose to wrestle with it. This happened when I was around 12 or 13 years old. My family's house sat at the end of a quiet neighborhood street that backed right up against a large forest. As a kid, I loved exploring and playing games with friends among the trees behind my home. Of all the wooded areas around our suburb, these woods always seemed the most dense and overgrown to me. In some spots, the trees grew so closely together you could barely squeeze between the trunks side by side with a friend. We used to have contests seeing who could traverse certain narrow gaps the fastest. I knew those woods like my own backyard. One Friday evening, I had my best friend Tyler over to hang out for the night since we didn't have school the next day. By the time he arrived, the sun was starting to set. But we still wanted to adventure into the forest while enough daylight remained to navigate the dense trees and uneven terrain. We grabbed some heavy-duty flashlights just in case it got dark before we headed back, then took off into the shadowy woods. We followed familiar paths deeper into the forest, leaves and twigs crunching satisfyingly under our shoes. About 15 or 20 minutes in, we came across a fallen mossy log that made a perfect spot to rest. We sat down and launched into random topics of conversation, as we love to do on our woodland hangouts. It was so peaceful to just chill and talk about life surrounded by majestic trees that stood like silent sentinels around us. Enjoying our lively discussion, at first we didn't notice how rapidly the light was fading as the sun went down. But when I finally glanced up and around, I realized the forest had grown nearly pitch black already. Startled out of our conversational bubble, Tyler and I looked at each other wide-eyed and switched on our flashlights. Time had gotten away from us. "We'd better start heading back before it gets totally dark," I said, trying to sound calm despite the uneasiness creeping over me. Being caught deep in the dense forest at night felt unnerving. But Tyler and I knew the area well, so I figured we'd be fine if we moved quickly. Standing up, we set off retracing our steps back towards home. I can't explain why, but as we crunched through the leaves, I felt creeped out by the complete stillness surrounding us, with our flashlights illuminating just a small circle on the path ahead. It was hard not to imagine unseen things lurking in the blackness. The only sounds were our footsteps and rapid breathing. I picked up my pace, eager to get out of there. Tyler followed closely, uncharacteristically quiet. After a couple minutes of brisk walking, we both froze in our tracks as the sound of slow, heavy footsteps directly ahead reached our ears. They had a steady, deliberate rhythm that turned my blood to ice. Someone was walking towards us just out of view about 20 to 30 feet ahead, obscured by thick trees. I shot Tyler a panicked look in the dim glow of our flashlights. Who would be out wandering around these dense woods at night all alone? I willed myself to stay calm and keep moving forward steadily. Maybe it was just a neighbor out for some strange nocturnal stroll. But as the unseen footsteps ahead of us seemed to grow louder, they suddenly stopped dead right as they were close to intersecting our path. Tyler and I both halted, barely breathing. The heavy stillness felt suffocating. After a few agonizingly long seconds, we heard the snapping of a twig directly behind us. My instincts seized up and adrenaline flooded my system. Gripping Tyler's arm, I took off sprinting wildly towards home, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back, just focused on moving as fast as I could through the darkness and trees clutching at us from all sides. I could hear Tyler crushing through the underbrush close behind, both our flashlights bobbing erratically ahead. But another set of heavier footsteps also followed, breaking into a run right after us. Maybe someone just trying to catch up and say hi, my rational brain offered weakly. But panic had taken over. I pushed my small legs harder, desperate to escape the surrounding void that seemed to close in faster with every gasping breath. After maybe 50 seconds of blind fleeing, the second set of pursuing footsteps behind us suddenly veered off sharply to the right into the trees. I was too freaked out to process anything except getting home alive. Bursting out of the tree line, I limped the last stretch up to my backyard gate, chest heaving, and scrambled up to the safety of our back porch. Peering out into the dark woods anxiously, I waited desperately for Tyler to also come staggering out. Long minutes passed and my alarm mounted. Had something happened to him? Just as I was about to run back out shouting his name, our front doorbell suddenly rang, making me jump. My dad opened the door with me hovering behind him nervously. It was Tyler, breathless and bug-eyed, but physically unharmed. I've never been more relieved in my life. As we guzzled water and tried explaining to my puzzled parents what had happened, Tyler filled in gaps. After I had sprinted off ahead, he had frozen, unsure what to do next. That's when he heard the second set of footsteps following behind me through the trees. Too terrified to move, he just stood paralyzed until the sounds passed him by. After debating what to do next, he had made a break from our house too, hoping we both made it back. My dad called the police to report the deeply unsettling encounter, but officers scouring the woods found no traces. Tyler and I are both in college now, but we still talk about that night sometimes, theorizing who or what could have been lurking out there in the darkness. Part of me wishes I had whipped around to glimpse who had pursued us. But at our young age, there's no way we could have outrun an adult in terrain we could barely navigate by daylight. In the end, I'm just grateful we made it back to safety, whether by luck or providence, watching over two foolish boys separated from the pack. But I've never ventured into those familiar woods again after sunset. Some primal instinct in me remains leery of whatever invisible eyes may still be watching from just beyond the last rays of light. Childhood naivety is shed in those moments we're forced to acknowledge the darkness that haunts the boundaries. And for that bliss lost, nostalgia persists. This unsettling incident happened to me just a few weeks ago, and I still can't stop replaying it in my mind. I had recently moved into my first ever apartment after turning 20 and wanting to finally experience living on my own, away from my parents' house. The complex I had found was in a nice neighborhood, small and just 3 stories tall with only 6 units total. The only apartment available at the time was on the very top floor, which wasn't my ideal choice, but I took it eagerly, too excited by the prospect of independence. After a long day carrying all my boxes and furniture upstairs with my dad's help, I was completely wiped out, but thrilled to be in my own space. We'd finished around 10 p.m., and my dad headed home, leaving me to my first night alone in my new place. I still had to set up my bed and eat dinner, but I was too exhausted to bother with much more than ramen noodles. As I filled up a pot from the sink and put it on the stove to boil, I suddenly heard a soft creaking from right outside my front door on the landing. The floors were hardwood and tended to creak, so at first I wasn't sure if it was just the building settling or the wind. But the creaking paused, then continued steadily, as if someone was definitely standing there. A bit unnerved being alone on the top floor in an unfamiliar place, I decided to check through the peephole, just for my own peace of mind. Taking a deep breath to calm my nerves, I crept over and slowly peered out. I could see an elderly man standing just a few feet away down the hall, facing towards the door of the unit across from mine. Assuming he must live in that neighboring apartment, I opened my door after a moment's hesitation and said politely, "Hello. Can I help you with something?" The man didn't respond right away. He just stood there motionless with his back to me. After an uncomfortable silence, he finally turned and muttered sorry before proceeding creakily down the stairs without further explanation. I closed the door, making sure to lock it, and tried shrugging off the odd encounter as I finished making my late dinner. But I still felt vaguely uneasy. The man clearly didn't live in that opposite unit, or else he would have just gone inside. Why had he been up on my isolated floor in the first place? I reasoned maybe he had just gotten confused in the dimly lit hallway. Trying to put it out of my mind, I focused on the excitement of spending my first night officially on my own. I didn't want to be creeped out over nothing. After eating, I got ready for bed, double-checked that the front door was locked up tight, and climbed under the covers, leaving on the bedside lamp to combat my lingering anxiety about being totally alone. I watched some videos on my phone to wind down, and eventually drifted off to sleep around midnight, exhausted from the big move. Sometime later, I jerked awake, pulse racing. I couldn't say what exactly had roused me, but I felt uneasy, like something was off. Glancing at my phone on the nightstand, I saw it was 1:29 a.m. I strained my ears in the dark silence, trying to figure out what was bothering me. That's when I heard it, soft shuffling footsteps from the floor below me, as if someone was moving around stealthily. I held my breath, listening intently. The footsteps paused, then about 5 minutes later, I heard the distinct creaking right outside my front door again from someone's weight on the boards. Now, I was really freaked out. I sat frozen in bed, covers clutched protectively up to my chin. Had I locked up before going to sleep? I couldn't totally remember. The creepy old man from earlier crossed my mind and adrenaline surged through me. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. What if I had left myself exposed on my very first night alone? Hardly daring to breathe, I listened to the subtle clicking and rattling of my doorknob being tested. The knob caught, locked. Relief crashed over me, and I nearly sobbed aloud. Whoever it was out there trying to get in gave up after finding it secured. I huddled still as a statue until I heard the neighboring door creak open and shut a minute later. My heart was pounding out of my chest, but I was enormously grateful in that moment for having double-checked the lock before bed. Just to be certain, I got up again and manually turned the deadbolt and chain too, making sure no one could enter if they tried my doorknob again. I crawled back into bed feeling marginally safer but still rattled. It took a long time before I fell back into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I awoke to aggressive knocking on my door that made me jump. I looked through the peephole cautiously to see 2 uniformed police officers standing there looking serious. I opened the door apprehensively, and they asked if I had experienced any unusual activity or commotion overnight. Apparently, 2 other units in the complex had been robbed. The burglars had entered through unlocked doors. The officers questioned me thoroughly about anything suspicious I may have witnessed. I recounted the unnerving encounters with the old man and the attempted break-in. They told me to keep my door locked at all times and said they'd patrol the property until the perpetrator was found. After that harrowing first night, I became obsessive about locking up and securing my unit before bed each night. I realized how close I had come to being victimized myself. If I hadn't bothered to double-check that lock before drifting off, my open door would have been an easy target too. The old man must have been scoping out my floor, testing doorknobs, hoping to find one left unlocked and vulnerable. Thinking back on it still gives me chills. But I learned important lessons about protecting myself living alone. And I'm grateful that my natural cautiousness kept me secure in a moment of unknown danger. My gut instincts proved wiser than my nerves in the end.